Condi, you now have 3 books in the works, and one of those is a foreign policy book. We're really not going to ask about that. I'm interested in your book about your parents. Talk about your parents. And you have another one in the works for tweens, because you're kind of a rock star among the 11 to 13-year-old set, as I understand.
Right. Well, for someone who decided to teach in college, it's been really fun to have 11 and 12-year-olds respond positively to me. But I'm writing a book about my parents because whenever I'm asked, how did you become who you are, I have to go back immediately to my parents. They were extraordinary, ordinary people. My father was a Presbyterian minister and eventually a high school guidance counselor, and then later a university administrator. My mother was a teacher. I would doubt that between them they ever made $60,000 a year, but there was no educational opportunity or chance to do something that was denied to me. And I've always said, too, that it was quite a feat of parenting to raise a little girl in segregated Jim Crow, Alabama, to believe that even if you couldn't have a hamburger at Woolworths, you could be president of the United States if you wanted to be. And so, so I was just enormously fortunate in the parents that I had. They also, of course, were wonderful educators in a community that believed in education, that saw education as both armor against racism and as the way that you would transform yourself and fulfill potential. So that's what the story's about.
And your father mentored people who went on to do great things.
Many of them.
Okay.
Among my father's students in his church, he had something called the Youth Fellowship. And it was for kids from his church, but they came from all over the city because, you see, my father was a Presbyterian minister, and unlike the Baptists, he could have dances at the church. And that's how he attracted kids. But among his students, the current president of the University of Maryland, Baltimore, Freeman Robofsky, a woman who went on to become the first black woman governor of the IMF, Mary Bush, the first National Merit Scholar in the whole state of Alabama, Cheryl McCarthy, a woman who went on to teach medieval studies at Michigan State University, and on and on and on and on, and just an enormously successful group of people, again, in circumstances where kids could have had limited horizons. These parents and teachers and the community managed to give them unlimited horizons, and I think that's a good story for not just Birmingham in the 1950s and 60s, but also today, where perhaps the messages to kids are not really very good messages about what's possible.
And tell us about your tweens book.
Well, the tweens book will be based on the family story,
okay.
And I got so many letters from young kids when I was secretary, and I would go to various countries, and there's nothing like getting to represent this great country abroad, and you get to see its strengths, you get to see its challenges, but inevitably a kid would come up and say, oh, you're that lady on television, or the little boy in Chengdu after the earthquake, a 12-year-old who said, you're that woman from that lady from America. And I thought, that's how I'd like to be known, that lady from America. But to me, the most enduring memories are of very conservative clerics in the Middle East who could not shake my hand because I was a woman. But at the end of the meeting, they would say, could you wait and meet my granddaughter? She'd really like to meet you. And some little covered girl would come out. And I thought that somehow in this man's mind, his own prejudices, his own training, he still wanted life to be good for his granddaughter, and that was a hopeful sign.
And you've come to believe that both educating and liberating girls in those kinds of societies is not just something good to do, but a national security issue.
Absolutely.
Can you talk about that?
I think that societies that treat women badly are dangerous societies. They're not decent to their own people. And if you're not decent to your own people, then you're not going to be decent to anyone else. And I also think that societies that are decent to women and give them opportunities tend to be more prosperous. We know from the work that is done on women-owned businesses, for instance, entrepreneurship in developing countries, that women who found these little companies, sometimes with just a $1,000 grant or less, employ a whole village. I was always very pleased to see with the work that USAID would do with microloans, that these women would start a little business. The whole village then was working, and not just women, but the whole village was working. And so it's both a way to get prosperity, it's a way to encourage decency in societies, it's a way for developing countries to move forward, and of course it's the right thing to do. And it's one of those wonderful coincidences of the right thing to do and something that is practically very important to our national security.
A tool against terrorism?
A tool against terrorism. No mother wants her son to be a suicide bomber. What a horrible thing to give your child over to that. Yeah. And so there's somehow, in circumstances like that, you have to look to the roots, and there has to be a degree of hopelessness there that a mother, and we know that every species defends the young to the death. And to have women in those societies willing to send their children to their deaths rather than to university means that something's really wrong. And I think addressing root causes like the empowerment of women, the freedom gap in those societies is very much a way also to address terrorism.
You know, looking at in Washington today, the term war on terror has gone out of vogue, as we know. Do you worry that we're letting down our guard?
Well, I know the folks in the Obama administration, and I know the president himself, and they're patriots, and I know that they're going to try to do what's best for the country. I know, too, that we all need to stay focused on the fact that we have been fortunate not to have another attack. I am grateful, I don't say proud, grateful that there wasn't another attack over the last 7.5 years. But every day, terrorists plot and plan to try and attack us, and they only have to be right once. We have to be right 100% of the time, and that's an unfair fight. So I know that vigilance is key. I know, too, that after 8 years, the 8-year anniversary was just last week, that after 8 years, people get tired, and they want to get on with life. And it had always been my hope that Americans could get on with their lives and not think every day about terrorism, because if we thought every day about terrorism, the terrorist would have won. But I know, too, that that can only happen because men and women in uniform, volunteers, by the way, are fighting on the front lines of freedom, and because there are people in our intelligence services, people in the Defense Department, in the State Department, and other places that are being vigilant on our behalf.